You have to kind of take your mind back to the turn of the last century. Everyone's discussing, should we have a national theatre for Britain? Should we have a monument to Shakespeare? They're kind of movements for these things. Eventually in 1908, they merged to make a committee, a big committee called the Shakespeare Memorial National Theatre Committee, or the SMNT. And then they just sort of can't decide what to do. There's various different huge fundraising efforts and things like that, but there isn't really any agreement. Finally, in 1914, they kind of hurriedly buy an empty patch of land in the middle of Bloomsbury, right near the British Museum, and decide to put the National Theatre there. But then war breaks out and it lies empty. So meanwhile, there's a big urge to commemorate Shakespeare before the war, leading up to 1916, which would have been Shakespeare's 300th anniversary, his tercentenary of his death. And there was a leading light in that, Professor Israel Gallantz. And he was a professor of literature, one of the first great professors of literature at King's College London. And he decided that this empty patch of land couldn't cut it during the war, that something could be done with it and commemorate Shakespeare in wartime, which was an impossible task. And he had seen YMCA huts, so respite huts for soldiers on leave, coming up around London, and appears to have pretty much single-handedly come up with the idea for a commemorative temporary building to Shakespeare that would be erected in 1916 and function entirely for the use of soldiers, serving soldiers in the war, and called it the Shakespeare Hut. So the Shakespeare Hut was not really a hut, it was really big, and it had its own theatre inside it, it had a restaurant, a cafe, a barber, it had dormitories to sleep, and it was there primarily for Anzac soldiers, New Zealanders, to come to who didn't have a home to go to because they couldn't get back home when they were on leave from the front, from fighting in the trenches and beyond. It was staffed almost entirely by women volunteers. There were 350 women who volunteered there, often from the Bloomsbury area, sometimes quite well-to-do women who would be cleaning, serving food, all those kind of practical things to make life a bit more bearable for the soldiers. But also in the theatre is extraordinarily significant itself. You have to imagine that it was tiny, it doubled as a dormitory, as an overflow, had a tiny little stage, but it could fit about 400 or 500 soldiers in it, squeezed in on folding chairs. And the stage was managed by women, by famous actresses and suffragists. And they did have men on the stage, they had actors, but they were managing, directing it entirely female-led, which is extraordinarily significant in the history of theatre. But also the actors that played there were some of the most famous actors of their time: Ellen Terry, Johnston Forbes Robertson, Ben Greet. This is like setting up a little stage and putting on Judi Dench, Kate Winslet, Kenneth Branagh. They're that kind of level of famous. It's a really strange feeling because obviously, studying Shakespeare back at school and college and university, we always read the Arden Shakespeare editions, and I've been very privileged to work with sort of Arden editors before and things, and it's very exciting. So yes, it's really important, I think, because it validates the story, which is a story that's important to New Zealand, it's important to women's history, it's important to how we understand Shakespeare, and it validates the importance of that story.